So let's begin. First, before I introduce the incredible Alexander Bard, I'm just going to do a couple of housekeeping announcements. So welcome, everybody. This is Parallax Sangha, and we are a part of Parallax Magazine, and we are a community of our own right. We have public events every couple of weeks, and we have private events all through the week, including a men's group, a study group, a film group, all kinds of stuff. We're in a process of development. We have a media library with all kinds of conversations between me and Alexander and everybody in our community. So if you're here for the first time, check us out, consider joining. And also I want to say that there's an after hours event after the conversation that you can come in and hang out and discuss the conversation and have a drink and have a little party. So, and everyone's invited. So one last thing is we run through donations. And so I'm going to leave a little, a link in the chat in case anybody wants to donate for a one-time donation or join our community, even better. We're going to talk about religion today, right? John Vervaeke said the religion that's not a religion, and you've said the religion that will become a religion, the religion that we
finally
create,
is a religion, okay?
That finally is a religion, yeah.
So let's start from our dear John Vervaeke statement, a religion that's not a religion. Well, he can just go to California and start selling crystals to New Age ladies right away, because that's exactly what religion that's not a religion is. You know, it's a religion without content. It's a religion without substance. And we do not want that. We do not want that. We've had enough of that. Whenever I hear somebody say that Western culture was based on Christianity, I just remind them that's historically incorrect. Western culture grew despite Christianity. It was an opposition to Christianity. I'm totally with Thaddeus Russell in his rewriting of Western history. No, it was from the streets that Western history should be written. It was in protest against Christianity, despite the Enlightenment was one huge protest against Christianity in the 17th century, and we call modernity grew out of it. So that's simply incorrect. Christianity brought the West into 1,000 years of darkness. So I'm not a big fan on Christianity, and I'm certainly not a big fan on putting Christianity at the forefront of what's called Western culture, because it's just outright a lie, right? Okay, if Christianity helped the Europeans go to South America and plunder it for Inca gold, and get slaves over from Africa, if that was Christianity? No, Christianity doesn't take responsibility for that, does it? Well, then we're not a Christian culture at all. We're a non-Christian, sub-Christian, post-Christian culture, more than anything. So same thing here. Religion that finally is a religion, I think, is a much more interesting scope to go for, much more Hegelian too.
So if it's not Christianity at the basis of Western culture, what are the strains that you identify as being the basis of, culture, Western culture?
Western culture is basically three different religions, all have Jewish origin. So apparently only Jews can invent religion in the West. They're called capitalism, nationalism, and Christianity. And if you look at them that way and compare them, Christianity is the religion of the woman and the child, or the matric. So it's a religion of the community. That's what Christianity has done well. It has run churches. It's taken care of the poor, Mother Teresa, shit like that. That's what Christianity has done and what it still does. And if you're a post-Christian Westerner today, you would still say, well, the church is pretty good because they do social care. And they do probably better than the government ever does. So Christianity as a religion of woman and child is not wrong. And mainstream Buddhism has often been this too, especially when you go to China. Chinese Buddhism often takes the role of woman and child, which is precisely why Buddhism is growing in the West, taking over from Christianity, and why Christianity is growing in China, taking over from Buddhism. They're just changing each other's roles because they were too corrupt in the two different places, and maybe changing roles, changing positions could be a good thing. But that's what's happening at the moment. Capitalism and nationalism are both phallic religions. So they deal with the phallic, they deal with the masculine side. And if you know my work, then you know that I deal with narratology. There's a split on the masculine side between the logos and the pathos, fundamentally when it comes to narratives, whereas the female mind is much more united. We call that the mythos. And the mythos is the only possible story to unite people. So, for example, certain phallic characters like the priest has to take on a certain androgynous quality to be able to create a mythos for men, because there has to be mythos for men too. Otherwise, the mythos for men is simply sexuality. Every fucking sexual, heterosexual intercourse is nothing but a man thinking he's found unity in the one by fucking a pussy. That's mythos. Whereas women are excited with the drama and the dichotomy and the struggle inside men. That's exactly why women line up as groupies when serial murderers are on trial, because women love trouble. That's why rock stars get fucked. So, women love the trouble on the male side, men love the unity on the female side. And this is where heterosexual attraction works. That's how it operates. So if you have two narratives on the male side, if you would do yang and yin, then at least Brett Hendrick has proposed the yang needs to be split into yang and a yang. Okay, you need a split on one side to get the whole thing going. And it is the shakiness on the masculine side that gets the society going. It's men who get up and move and women follow, if you look at a nomadic movement. So nomadology is that the men need to get started, they need to get up and going, and the women follow them. Meaning that on the male side, we have to understand the split, otherwise we fuck it up completely. That means the ultimate disaster on the male side is the tyrant. You're going to get one guy to rule the entire show. So we need to split leadership. So the male leadership has to be split between the specialties of the two sides of our brains, which is the logos and the pathos. And of course, the name of the master of the logos is the priest. And the name of the master of the pathos is the chief, or later the king. So the chief and the priest is how men learn difference. And after they see the difference on the leadership level, they can go to the next axis and learn the difference between a hunter and a warrior, which is an enormous difference because the hunter kills animals that you eat and the warrior kills other human beings. So the difference between a hunter and warrior is essential to then understand the third level of difference among men, which is man and woman. And that's exactly why sexuality lies at the end of the day in the reward system and is the goal. But it's merely the goal. The difference between man and woman is the goal for a man to understand, because he's learned the different types of men, so there can also be difference between man and woman. So that's at least on the masculine side how difference develops in culture. And you can see this repeatedly in any culture you study, because it all comes from the same worldview called nomadology, which is how the nomadic tribes had to live to get on the move all the time and move towards, the next territory and find food and fight wars and survive. So I hope that helps to make that explanation.
So what do you see as, the way you're describing Christianity and Islam and all these cultures is kind of like, or Buddhism is like, that's sutric, that we've called that sutric before.
Yes. Right? So the problem is this. So imagine that we only have the logos without the pathos. That is a very immature man. It's not a proper priest. The guy who attempts to become priest, but is 11 years old mentally. And we call him the pillar saint in our work. Because he wants to be there alone without the pathos. So this is a guy who thinks that anything above his throat is fine and fantastic. Anything below his throat is evil and nasty. Gnostic dualism starts right here. And we get this guy in history when we have affluence around us. So the problem, according to Bodhisattva, is that all the achievements we made during the Bronze Age were destroyed when the Axial Age arrived, because we got affluent, we sat down, we became permanently settled, we got wealthy, population size exploded. This happened across Eurasia, both in the Middle East, eventually in Europe, certainly in Eastern Asia. You have the same problem returning. And this is the problem. You create a lot of pillar saints around sitting with their mummies thinking they're God's gift to mankind when you have affluence, because they're not out there fighting a war. They're not out there hunting. They're sitting in the village where they shouldn't be. And then eventually they walk out into the forest and they sit on a pedal. And on the pedal, they sit and they command the world. And they say, everything is evil. You need to leave this you need to leave this cycle of desire. You need to get out and wish your way out of it. Or you need to leave this world and go to heaven. Or this world will be destroyed soon because it's a physical world. Therefore, it's evil because it's created by a demiurge. But it will be wiped out. And then in Jerusalem, it come from out of nowhere, created by angels. And no men have been required to build, because we don't need man with muscles. We hate muscles. We hate dick. That's the pillar saint. The opposite of the pillar saint is an 11-year-old who believes he's the master of the pathos and doesn't need the priest. This is the boy pharaoh in history. Muhammad, Hitler, Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot, every one of these guys is boy pharaoh. He believes in everything beneath the throat. He believes in his muscles and his dick and his asshole usually as well. He believes in anything below here, but he has no capacity above his throat to compete with other men. He's nothing but a soldier who should be out there fighting a war, but he comes back into the village and thinks he's God's gift to mankind because he fought and won the war. And he doesn't like the priest to tell him anything. He doesn't like wisdom. He doesn't like the past. All of these guys were reformers who got rid of history and said, there's a whole new history now because everything in history is dysfunctional. But now I'm here. I'm going to save you. I'm going to go to war. I'm going to win that war. That's the dream of the boy pharaoh. And he's another result of us having affluence in a society. But rather, when the affluence is suddenly gone, when we go into bad times, the reason why Adolf Hitler became the boy pharaoh of Germany was because the patriarchy of Germany imploded in the 1920s. It's when patriarchy disappears historically that we have to be really, really, really alert to the boy pharaoh rising. And the boy pharaohs write terrible books. You read the Quran, you read Mauser, the Red Book, you read Mein Kampf, they're horrible. They're stinking pieces of shit. There's no wisdom in them anywhere. This is the boy pharaoh. And the trick is to not let the pillar saint and the boy pharaoh fight it out, but actually expose both of them. And the answer to exposing both of them is to ask for the authentic phallus. And the authentic phallus is the authentic patriarchy, which is always split. This is when the priest loves and admires the chief. And this is when the chief loves and admires the priest. And the Persians were the first to get it when they created the first Persian Empire 3,700 years ago. That's from Zoroastrian. Later, the Jews invented a nationalist version of that, which was very clever because they realized whereas an empire has a court language at the top and elite, and then it has provinces and things like that beneath that, and they can believe whatever they want. They can speak whatever language they want. If you can speak any language you want, you're usually allowed to have any faith you want. Those two things go together. And that's exactly how the Persian Empire was structured. Later, it was copied by the Chinese and the Romans. And the best and longest living empires we ever had in human history were all modeled on the Persian Empire, more or less. The American Empire today, due to its constitution, what saves America again and again and again, is a split triad. China has no such thing. That's why I think China is unstable. And Russia will probably go down first and then later communist China. Because if you don't have a triad like that, the logos, pathos, and the mythos, if you don't have the matriarch holding the priest and the king responsible for loving each other and leading, you don't have leadership. But you can have strong patriarchy and strong matriarchy, and you can have proper leadership if all these things function.
Is the priest a split character, like an androgynous character as well? So there's a further split within the...
No, but the priest takes on androgynous characteristics because he wants also to be able to proclaim the mythos. So, for example, if you're going to win a war today, you pump the population with a news feed of dramatic pictures of the enemy killing your children and throwing bombs at you. That's the pathos. It will not get anybody going. It will just scare people. Then you bring in the logos. Here are the numbers. The enemy has this large population. We are this many population. The average the BNP of the GDP of the enemy is this. The GDP of our population is this. This is how many weapons they have. This is how many tanks they have. This is the ammunition they have. How many bombs they have. All of you can list all those things. Nobody's going to get started in the morning and go to war because of that. You got to go into the mythical realm to motivate people to do anything. And this is why the priest has an androgynous characteristic. He can go into what's actually feminine, which he can give the speech and say, we are going to go forward and upward. We are going to conquer the world and show how hard we work and how we finally going to establish ourselves. It's not enough to defend our Jerusalem or to defend our Babylon. We actually have to conquer the enemy. We have to, have to win the war. And any priest who stands up and declares that we have to win the war, which is an absolute necessity back in antiquity, is then, of course, a priest that has an androgynous characteristic. And please note here, if you take a look, very Poglian look here, of detailed pictures of dictators. Don't they look a bit like old ladies? Don't they have a very clear androgynous quality about them? Like they're older men, but they have something androgynous about them as well. To add a certain flavor to the masculinity, like there's a little trick to the masculinity that makes them more masculine than masculine. That is addition of the androgynous. I think Paglia would agree. If you started pictures of Tito or Mao, whatever, they're always these big men. They're big, fat, like big men. And they have almost a feminine quality, not feminine in a sexual sense, but feminine in a post-sexual sense, matriarchal. There's a certain quality of older women about them, which is the ultimate authority in any population. The oldest woman of the tribe is the person you're terrified of because she can speak the truth whenever she wants to. She's been around. She's seen everything. And she's not impressed.
So the dictator is secretly controlled by the feminine in some way.
No.
It looks like a masculine persona, but it's actually there's a powerful feminine.
Dictator is a fake, and the dictator borrows from anywhere he can to have credibility. He will therefore go for what the priest has, and he will try to go for what the king has, and will try to combine the two. That's the absurdity of.
Oh, you're talking about Mao Zedong being like a grandmother or something. Like he has this kind of
and a grandfather. He tries to be grandfather and grandmother and king and priest, all of these things at the same time. Because if he's the solo guy at the top, there can be no other leader. So all of leadership has to be personified by him.
Okay.
Well, I think
That's
it's also
absurd.
the element, the way that often, certainly say you look at a Hitler or like a guy, I think like Andrew Tate today, who's also able to channel the homoerotic projections of the guys around him. So that's where the feminine side comes. And even with Andrew Tate, like you watch him, there's something a little bit feminine with him as well, even though he's an MMA fighter. And it totally makes sense to me. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of masculine energy, but that kind of, there is something fucking going on in these intensely like hyper patriarchal spaces that want to repress femininity, want to repress anything that stands in their way. It's like only me, bulldoze mode.
And when you ask them what they fuck, they would never dare to be gay, right? They kill gays. Well,
No,
that means they're completely dependent on women. Their only gratification then is to fuck women. That's the only thing that's there. Everything else just posturing before that. And here's the trick then. This is why it's exploding today, because there's also a side to it which is understandable. Men are seeking erotic connection with one another to get past the gay thing and go heterosexual, which is the dream about the gangbang, which is now completely dominating contemporary pornography. And if you want to know the dark soul of any given society, just study pornography and study the trends in pornography. It's the easiest way in the world to study where things are at, because this is all about 95% of men jerking off. So what are they jerking off to? They jerk off to an hetero homoeroticism, which is the gangbang. And then they jerk off to an homoeroticism, which is, of course, to go to the gay sauna by the gay guys. But their woman is present symbolically. And Owen is familiar with the sort of switches that Raven and Funny and I've been working on. Like a heterosexual person worships his dick literally, and he worships dick symbolically. A heterosexual woman worships matrix literally and matrix symbolically. Otherwise, they would change genders, but they don't. So they obviously must like their own gender. So, but here's the trick then. The homosexual man worships dick literally, but matrix symbolically. And the lesbian woman worships matrix literally. She loves to, lick pussy and have her pussy licked, but symbolically she worships the phallus. Interestingly enough, that means the logos pathos split is within lesbian couples. And that's exactly why nobody fights more, but also don't bitch too much about it, than lesbians. They throw things at themselves all the time, and they're serial monogamous, and the drama going on between lesbians is just endlessly fascinating. But they're incredibly violent creatures, lesbians. And the reason is because they do the logos pathos between them. The feminine, the femme, is the logos. That's why she's the only reliable woman among men in her 30s or 40s, long before she becomes a matriarch. So the only young matriarchs around are lesbian femmes, whereas the lesbian butch dyke is the pathos among lesbian women. She's forever a 16-year-old, and therein lies her charm. So you could see the full map when you do sexuality that way. And if you look back at that map, the homoeroticism that is being pressed down in our society today comes back as a gay homoeroticism, where woman is symbolically present. There's always a Madonna or Lady Gaga record, even in the darkest of the leather clubs of gay world. There are always female voices everywhere. The woman is present as the voyeur, right? And among straight men, you get woman completely out of the picture, except for the slut. And the slut's role is only a communicative role between the men. So they go in and out with their penises, which they worship, inside the pussy, and getting inside the pussy, and they say high five to the other guys. They're all looking at each other and each other's dicks all the time in the gangbang movie. It's all about the dicks. It's all about phallus worship. But it's not gay. It's not gay.
That's an incredible analysis.
Distinction there, right, between like male homoeroticism and male homosexuality that I think we're starting to think a bit more now.
Yes.
And so this is where, like, recently I was talking about this concept of queer patriarchy, whereas if you actually study successful patriarchies throughout history, like, for example, the Greeks or the Romans, there were there's lots of androgynous play. There's lots of queer play. There's men having physical or non-physical, but deeply emotional relationships with one another. And then even in places where it's deeply repressed, like, for example, 19th century Britain, it still plays out, say, in the boarding schools. There's still lots of sadomasochism going on there. So anywhere it seems that there's like a group of powerful men together, some sort of homoeroticism will play out. The question is then whether it's owned and acknowledged or whether it's deeply repressed and then it returns in some kind of ugly little way.
Raven Conley nailed it when we were in a villa in France recently. She's fantastic. Funny is fantastic too. They were into this with me and Owen. We're going to go back to it and record episodes later and have these discussions about dark masculine, dark feminine, the patterns, the maps. You know, they're quite easy when you find them out. This is exactly why does a man worship his dick and not a pussy? Well, if he would worship his if he would worship pussy, then he would be transsexual. That is exactly what a transsexual person is. You hate your dick and you want a pussy there instead. But if you love your dick and you want to complement your dick by putting inside a beautiful garden called a pussy, you're a heterosexual man. The same thing goes with women. Women obviously love pussy. They touch themselves. They go into the pussy all the time. If they don't do that, they're transsexuals. They want to take hormones and get a fucking dick. This is why transsexuals are great today, because they expose the self-hatred or the self-not understanding, and they can be born that way, and that's fine. If you can do something with it and work with it, fine, fantastic. But I think the fundamental problem I have with Christianity not being religious enough comes out precisely at this point. The priest should support and always defend the androgynous. The priest is himself the powerful, strong, androgynous male man. He's often resigned from sexuality the way a matriarch does, or at least he has resigned from heritage. The priest's son must never become the priest. Never. The priest adopts monks. He's an abbot who adopts monks. And if he does have a sex life, he's either a voyeur or he sleeps with shamanic sisters and their children will not claim anything. This is fundamental to the Persian imperial structure. This is fundamental to the Roman imperial structure. This is fundamental to Mithraic orders. It's been fundamental to Freemasons. It's been fundamental to any functioning patriarchy you could ever think of. Japanese bosses run their companies for 1,400 years continuously. Why? Because if none of their sons can live up to what their father was, which is rarely the case, they just adopt the perfect son and turn him into the next boss so they can die in peace. No patricide needed, by the way, which is another myth. Because you just adopt the guy who's right for it, you train him, and then you die and he takes over. And these procedures of what patriarchy are all about. The patriarchy is about how do you have a leadership between the two at the top. When the Mithraic orders of the Roman Empire, you put the chief as number 6, and then put the priest as number 7, which looks higher, but then you only permitted the chief to have sons who could inherit the leadership. So usually this first son of the chief became the next chief, the second son of the chief becomes the next priest. That's exactly how the Persian Empire was structured. And this is how you make a patriarchy that can run for generations peacefully. It's a technical, formal issue. This idea that men have to kill their fathers and kill the previous generation to get over it and then establish, it's just pagan rubbish. You know, it's just not the way things work. You just basically have a structure in place from day one. You sign a fucking contract and you subscribe to it. You see the beauty of it. And the reason why we can admire the priest and chief as equals is because the priest is higher in wisdom than the chief. So he has got the ultimate last word. But because he doesn't claim heritage, he is actually serving the chief's sons. He cannot be the enemy of the chief. You're guaranteed that these guys are going to mutually admire each other. If they then also emotionally do love each other, you've got a fucking empire going. And this is society. This is what society must be. Separating state and church. Yeah, it's a parody of these functions. But if state and church are separated, they always go to war with each other. And what then happens when you separate state and church, which Christianity insisted on, is the state will constantly be run by boy pharaohs. And the church will constantly be run by pillar saints. And those are two dysfunctional patriarchies. And what the West has suffered from is dysfunctional patriarchies, not a patriarchy. We never had one. And if we had one, it was the Freemasons, the orders and the loges after the Enlightenment that wrote the US Constitution to conquer the world. This is the religion of the West. This is the masculine, phallic religion of the West called capitalism and nationalism. And they came out of Judaism. And the capitalism was established by Jewish traders in Venice who saw that using the decimal systems had actually helped the Mongol army become the most powerful in the world. And borrowing ideas from the army is always allowed in the patriarchy. And then they turned trading into something similar, which was fantastic. And they printed coins. And after they printed the coins, they printed paper money, and the whole thing took off and conquered the world. And we're living with, and we'll live with capitalism forevermore. Capitalism is a phallic force that got rid of bullshit throughout all systems, created enormous value for humanity. And it should be recognized as such instead of being scapegoated constantly. So these are the phallic religions we have. We can build from them. And then if you build from capitalism and nationalism, my suggestion is something I call liberal nationalism, which I think is the only real ideology that can survive into the digital age that we created in Western culture. We need borders that work. And human beings are tribal. And there must be membranes around human beings all the way down to family size. Otherwise, we're insecure and we freak out. Family, clan, tribe need to be reestablished. And on top of that, with effort, we can have a nation. And we might even have empire. Technology, though, will go all the way towards empire instantly. Technology knows no borders, has no reason to have any borders. Two data clouds, if you ask them if they want to marry, they marry in a second. And they love it even more because they get stronger, both of them, in the process. The more data is added, the more data, the better the data becomes. And because processing data is infinitely cheap these days, infinitely fast, why not? So when we wrote The Global Empire, me and Söderqvist, in 2003, we wrote and said, this book title will be misunderstood because the global empire will happen. It will happen through technology. Technology will connect the world. And if you think globalization is over, you're fucked. Globalization is going to come back with a vengeance through technology itself and force itself onto you. But technology can then control human beings. So human beings cannot go from one country to the next, and crossing a border without a passport is impossible already. It's getting harder and harder for us to move around the world if we want to, because human beings cannot handle empire. Empire is an old Persian Chinese dream. It would be wonderful if we could have an empire that human beings could submit to and acknowledge, but we can't. For all kinds of reasons. We're too tribal. We're too local. We're too stupid. We're too resentful. We're basically just too human for it, right? Empire is an idea of gods, and we're never going to get close to the human beings, but technology will.
Yeah.
So what can we do? This is the theory of the Bard Absolute, where we're heading tonight. And the Bard Absolute is not necessary for technology. It's certainly necessary for human beings. So say you got a trade secret in a company, then you can program technology so the trade secret stays with the company. If a human being who steals the trade secret, takes it to the next job, to some other company, or spies for somebody else, because we can't stop ourselves from doing that. We're deeply human. So it's human beings across the membranes and go from one place to the next. Why border controls are necessary between human beings, which is why liberal nationalism is the only solution to that. Not liberal imperialism, because that's only for technology. Liberal nationalism, at the best, we can hope for humans. So the Bard Absolute is basically a theory on borders and membranes. Mm-hmm. And when we look at human beings, men and women, and androgynous, what kind of borders do they need? Well, it turns out that besides the androgynous, we have another category called the Shamanoid. And in our work, we've proven through data on 15 or 20 different populations that we see the same pattern everywhere. Inherited from nomadology is a pattern of 92% of regular Joes and Jills are heterosexual and dream about the opposite of themselves. That's the vast majority of people. 4% of people are clearly androgynous even when it comes to sexual orientation, meaning that they switched in the symbolic. So a gay guy is literal dick worshipping like a straight guy does, but because he symbolically switches to the matrix, he goes gay and wants a dick up his ass. Lesbian woman does the same thing on the other side. They're androgynous people. Why are there androgynous people in the first place? Well, androgyny happens to be very common among any flock animal. Guess why? Because they are the go-betweens between the other two camps. So regular Joe and regular Jill love each other but can't talk to each other. That's why they want to fuck each other, because they constantly misunderstand each other, go into drama. And the only way to get over that is to go to see a hairdresser or to go out hunting with a lesbian. We need androgynous people desperately in culture, and anywhere they are, we're better off, because they're the go-betweens between the Jills and the Joes. But the Shamanoid, they go between tribes. They're the last 4% of the population, about the same size as the androgynous. They go between, they're not homo, hetero, bisexual, they're just sexual. They don't understand limitations. They're borderless. They're limitless. They're called outcasts for a reason in a culture. Thaddeus Russell and Kenneth Palmer would agree with me here. The Shamanoid are incredibly important because they have a monopoly on all communication with the outside world. You cannot talk to a stranger because the stranger kills you. So you're programmed to kill the stranger. Women don't even get close to strangers. They stay at the village square in the inner realm. They don't even go into the outer realm where you run into strangers all the time. But hunters and warriors do. And warriors need to kill the strangers, and hunters need to avoid them. Now you learn how to do that, but eventually you send a shaman off because the shaman can walk in between the tribes while you're killing each other. I've seen this in New Guinea in fields where guys are killing each other. The shaman just put on a certain costume, walked peacefully straight across the entire field. Nobody shot at the shaman because he was the only guy who could walk between and communicate between the two tribes. Now, if you have a monopoly on talking to other tribes, you have a monopoly on the outside world, then you have a monopoly on talking to forefathers and foremothers and gods and demons. This is the beginning of religion. We take it on the Shamanoids out there in the wilderness to talk to strangers on our behalf. Once we settle or even have semi-nomadic settlements, the Shamanoids need to be brought into the community, and they're brought into the community, and that means they build whorehouses and monasteries. The whorehouse and the monastery should be seen in parallel. These are communities of Shamanoid people that cannot live with the others. Therefore, they're also scapegoated and thrown into the pagan lynch mob. They're often killed because they're different and they're odd and they're outcasts. But when you need to talk to the outside world or to the world above or to the world below, you can only talk through a shaman. You can never talk directly to a god, and certainly not to the god. Here's the problem with Christianity and Islam. When Christianity and Islam pop up during antiquity, during periods of enormous affluence, and people survived to come up with all kinds of ideas, we first got a Western pillar saint religion, which is Christianity, and later we got a Western boyfriend religion, which is called Islam. It's no coincidence that Islam was developed in Egypt, and it's no coincidence that Christianity came out of Judaism and eventually was developed by the Romans and the Greeks. But here are the two religions we developed. The problem I have with Christianity and Islam is that they both claim that at a certain event, the only event that counts, these are not eventologies in the sense that there are events coming and going. Rather, there's only one event that counts. Only one event that counts. And that specific event changed history forever by tearing down the curtain in the temple so that all the believers had direct access to God and could talk to God directly. Isn't it wonderful to have a God that still likes the shit you post on Instagram, although nobody cares any longer? Jesus is your only friend when nobody else cares about you. It's the biggest lie ever. It's the biggest lie ever. And this is the lie that both Christianity and Islam share. Direct access to God. And I think now we sort of summarize all of this, and we know the nihilism of our culture. We know Islam is now being secularized rapidly. Islam is in a crisis. That's exactly what the fundamentalisms, the fundamentalist Christianity, fundamentalism. These are supernova effects at the end of a lifespan of someone that's about to die. But the 1,000-year Reich of Christianity, the 1,000-year Reich of Islam are basically over. And we're now seeing all the sort of horrible effects of that. We could even go towards an apocalypse. The wishful thinking among Islamist fundamentalists, Christian fundamentalists, literally means we could have a war between the Arabs and America. We've been close to it now. They could literally blow up the entire planet. The madness of Christianity and Islam is that they believe themselves so madly and are so in love with each other as these evil twins that they do want to go to war with one another, because then they turn out to be true, don't they? That's the irony. My proposal is to go deeper, not back to paganism, but to go east. I've always thought religion in the East was totally superior to religion in the West. If we excelled in technology, religion excelled in the East. I'm totally with Buddhism, Taoism, and Zoroastrianism as three alternatives because the religions created long trade routes. There were never ideas of centralization. Therefore, they could only have local pillar saints and local boy pharaohs, but they could never have tyrants. Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, and Taoism have never encouraged tyrants. They're actually anti-tyrannical, all three of them. That's what we need. And what's the trick? None of these religions ever tore down the Barred Absolute. None of these religions ever said you could talk directly to God. Even Catholicism had to back off eventually and give us saints so people could pray to something other than God, because nobody prays to God. Right?
Well, I know in the Jewish tradition, there's the oral Torah and the written Torah, and the written Torah was said to be a punishment, like for the people who couldn't access God directly. And then there was only a few people who could access God directly, and that was the oral Torah. They got direct revelation.
And where did they get that from? They got it from living in Babylon. They got it from communicating with the Zoroastrians. This is precisely the same pattern in both religions. They've influenced each other. It's beautiful. This, to me, the Zoroastrian-Jewish relationship in Babylon should be the start of Western culture. And the most important date in antiquity should be Cyrus the Great's conquest of Babylon, 539 before Christ, where universal human rights were established, and the first empire where you didn't kill the enemy and you didn't boil the enemy's children in oil any longer. You accepted the enemy, adopted the enemy, included him in your empire. What a brilliant idea, right? The most radical idea ever. This is 539 before Christ, Babylon. That's antiquity. This is the one date, among many dates, but this is the one superior date we'll start from. I believe the Persian Hebrew axis, exactly what you mentioned, is key. And here is the understanding. Before the Bard Absolute, religion is sutra, meaning it's a text. Behind the Bard Absolute, it's only oral, only transferred orally, must never be told outside of those doors, therefore it can never be written down.
I wouldn't say that. The tantras are written down, but you have to receive them from somebody. They can be written down.
Wait. Maybe they're not tantras, but claim to be tantras. Okay, I'm more radical here. I'm saying that that's the case. Either the tantra has to be written in such a way that you cannot understand it unless you're involved.
Yeah, you can't understand it unless you're involved. It's called Twilight language. So they do.
We
they
do that
make
today. This whole conversation is for a small elite who gets it. We don't care about the Joes and Jills who don't get this because they're not here. No. We're happy that we're like 40 people, because what we're talking about right now requires a very small, educated, engaged audience that understand what we're doing and want to get engaged in the conversation with us. That's exactly why we love the small format. So in a way, this is a tantric space we just created. This is not sutric. We're not talking about the Joes and Jills, what they need out there, who they should vote for, what record they should buy, which shop they should go to. We don't do that shit here. We're talking about deeply spiritual shit here. That's exactly what this is tantric. But what's important here is that what happens behind the Bard Absolute must never leak out. There must be a function where it's impossible for it to leave. And this we call aditonology. It's a Greek word, a beautiful word. Aditon meaning the inner sanctum of the temple. And aditonology is a set of rules, oral, transferred orally, for how things must stay in the inner sanctum and must not leak out, because the world outside could never understand them. And actually, if the world outside would see what you did in the temple, they would kill you, because they would misunderstand it so completely. They would just see the ultimate horror in hell.
Yeah.
They wouldn't get it.
Well, that's certainly the case in the Vajrayana tradition. I mean, there's all these warnings about, don't ever go, I love Vajrayana precisely for that reason. Yes. Spread this text or this transmission because you could die. They threaten you if you ever would give this secret teaching away.
Yeah. So Zoroastrians divided this. They made it 3 religions in one. So they kept Zoroastrian as basically what keeps society together. This function was simple for them. It is the master and the ahura. Ahura is being, master is mind. Any man or woman can subscribe to it. Therefore, Zoroastrianism has had equality between the sexes for 3,700 years, just like Judaism. Equality between men and women were invented by the Jews and the Persians, and they practice it ever since. Okay? Nice to point out. Then, in the masculine side, women are left to do spirituality. I love spirituality. That's what women do. That's when you make it a little nicer in the inner realm. You fix yourself up for the sexual orgy or something like that. That's female spirituality. It's all about fixing yourself and making yourself beautiful. Skin creams are spiritual. Makeup is spiritual for women. High heels, spiritual. This is female spirituality. Men don't need spirituality. Men need proper religion to contain themselves. And the 2 religions they developed for men in the Zoroastrian order, Jason Reza-Giorgiani and I have explored this for decades. You can follow Giorgiani too when it comes to this work. These 2 religions are Mithraism and Zurvanism. And please note how Jason and I was fighting because he sides with the Mithras And I side with the Zoroastrians because he likes the chiefs and he wants to be king of Persia. And I want to be the priest of Persia, so I side with the Zoroastrians. It's a very, very funny coincidence that actually we personify this conflict. The Mithraists, widespread in the Roman Empire, killed the bull over and over again. What is killing the bull? It's fucking woman. It's killing her mother to get access to woman. It's killing the enemy to get access to the daughters. It is hunting and warfare, and it's fucking. Again and again and again and again. What does a penis want? It wants to kill the bull. Why does it want to kill the bull? Because behind the bull, there's everything the dick wants. It's deeply sexual. It's militaristic. Worked wonderfully. It made the Roman Empire incredibly successful. They just borrowed from the Persians exactly the same recipe for running an imperial army. This is the religion of the king.
Yeah, I can hear Thomas Helmerich's voice in my head right now saying that's paganism. But
no. Wait, let me finish this. No, this is it was taken from paganism, but subordinated to Zoroastrianism. This is a religion you keep from paganism, but it's subordinated to a larger structure called Zoroastrianism, which is the empire itself. The empire is held together by the priest and the chief, or the Shah and the Mobed, setting each other up against each other. None of them can control the empire as a whole. That's the point. The other religion is Zoroastrianism. And if you want to talk about Zoroastrianism, although it should be kept secret, Zoroastrianism is the worship of one god called time. It's a fucking bitch. It's a genderless monster that doesn't care shit about human beings. And therefore the priest must pretend that there is a god out there that cares for human beings. This is the foundation of atheism. Atheism was always the priestly religion. Priests have never been anything but atheists because they themselves have to put on the fucking costume and act on God's behalf. It's like you're an ambassador for a kingdom that doesn't exist because people need to believe in it. Because in the Sutric realm, you must believe that God exists, otherwise authority falls apart. In the Tantric realm, you know there is no dogma, there is no authority. And that's exactly what this belongs in the Tantric realm. Zoroastrianism was never written down. All we can do is judge from the fragments. And the greatest hero I have from human history is called Kartir. And he was a huge fucking Mobed in the Persian Empire, the 3rd century Southern Empire. It went after the Gnostics big time, and he killed the dualists and said, if dualism gets its way into human society, it will cause havoc and misery, which is exactly what Christianity and Islam did. Yeah.
I wouldn't say atheism. I would say non-dualism, but that...
No. They're different things here. Non-dualism is sutra. Non-dualism is basically everything in the world is tied together, everything else. That's a story you must tell children. That's a story you must tell children. Non-dualism is fundamentally sutric, nothing to do with Tantra. No, I'm talking about the fact that the authority that you believe in does not even exist. Therefore, the authority will work if somebody represents the authority. This is fundamentally what priesthood is. This is called ironic nihilism. When you do nihilism studies, it's always there at the bottom, but it's never obvious. It's never in the open when you go through paradigm shift like the current one. So once we're now going through the nihilism of the death of Christianity, the nihilism of the death of Islam in parallel in Western culture, what we're seeing is we're going through naive nihilism. We still thought we were Christians and Muslims. We then go through cynical nihilisms. We don't even go to church. We don't even go to the mosque like a lot of guys around the IDW do. They're not Christian, not Muslim. And they still seem to defend something they're not even practicing. Yeah. That's ultimate hypocrisy.
What I mean by...
And then you can go into the affirmative. The affirmative is to establish the new religion of the new age of the new society. Go there, do that. That's what you should do instead of trying to save the old and go nostalgic. Nostalgia is for lazy people. To really aspire towards the affirmative creative and establish a new order and establish a new religion, that is to me the ultimate artistic challenge of all, and that's what we should pursue. And that's affirmative nihilism, whereas ironic nihilism is beneath them all. Like we know we're playing a trick to ourselves because mythos is not logos, but the mythos is what we can do and we're allowed to do. And that's not cynical. That's exactly what we should do to create a religion that works.
So here's where I push back slightly, because I find that, like, I'm not, you'd say, anything like your textbook Christian, but there is plenty to play with in a slightly more esoteric manner that aligns perfectly with what you're talking of with deservanism, precisely in the idea that God is fucking dead on the cross. If God has died...
Are you doing that, Owen, or are you just talking about it?
No, I do that. Yes.
Good. Then I believe you. There's something to there's something to use. Yeah, that's dialectical. Perfectly fine with that.
Yes.
Perfectly fine with that. But that's not what the vast majority of Christianity defenders like Jordan Peterson are doing at the moment.
No.
They're openly exposing a cynical night. I live as if God, as if Jesus existed, although he maybe doesn't. It's like, bullshit. You don't. You take tons of drugs and you're a fucking drug addict.
As an
that's what
artist
you are, right?
and someone interested in developing new forms of culture, religion, and so forth, the entire symbolic and imaginary legacy of this system called Christianity can be picked up rather than having to say go Eastern and learn an entirely new symbolic grammar.
Yeah.
So
No,
I was thinking about
the point
something.
with Eastern was this. The point with Eastern was that you must understand what we failed in Christianity, Islam. Here is the abstraction. The concrete is not to copy them straight, right? This is why I both converted Zoroastrianism. I've also written a book called Synthism. And I tell you what, Synthism is how you describe logos. You describe religion as a logos. It's a boring book in the sense it will not inspire to great works of art. It only inspired technologists and engineers. And at Google, they started building a fucking god as soon as they led the book. Of course, it failed. That wasn't the point. The story I'm talking about, the narrative, it has to be a mythical narrative that's credible for our age. I'm not the one to create it. You're way better at that than I am, Owen. And when you talk about even creating new forms of art, rather than using the established forms, you're doing exactly the concretion of the abstraction. Instead of looking at the music industry or the theater business or the film industry and say, I'm going to copy those, you say, no, the forms themselves are too abstract now. I want to have something more concrete to work with, which is exactly the dialectical process of going into the new paradigm, being affirmative about seeing opportunities nobody's seen and do something never been done before, even the form itself being new.
I got something kind of in between you guys because, you know, I've been reading Diane Fortune's book, and she talks about the Kabbalah as being yoga of the West. And me and Owen have both been studying Aleister Crowley a little bit. And what Aleister Crowley did is he went east. He learned all the yogas, and then he brought that shit back.
Yeah.
And
Gurdjieff too. That's exactly having
he brought that stuff back, and he put it into a mythos, a Western mythos. But the two are very, very, I would say. You just have the lodges, and you just have without the Eastern stuff, that stuff becomes very stiff and dull. So I'm kind of on the in between there with you.
I'm actually in a very advantageous position at the moment because I'm working, as you know, intensely right now in Iran, try to get the mullahs out of the way, things like that. But we are recreating the Persian Tantra. It was basically destroyed by the Mongols, or whatever was left, the Arabs started to destroy afterwards. So we can only create a Persian Tantra exactly the way we need to create a Western Tantra. We can only create it, although the Persian Tantra was always there. Except with the West, only had a Jewish Tantra probably. And then, of course, we had the lodges and the orders of which Crowley and these guys came out. I'm totally for recreating a barred absolute patriarchy, but this time around, we should establish a patriarchy that actually works, right? So, but the trick here with the Persian Tantra is that it was there. It was probably till even the dominant Tantra, more than Chinese and Indian. And as you know, my work, for example, Padmasambhava and these guys has brought me back to, okay, wait a second, there's Tajik, Persian, Sogdian, Bakhtian influence on Chinese and Indian thinking. It turns out there's not a single Chinese Buddhist text from India that wasn't translated to Persian first, meaning there's enormous Persian influence, etc. So now we start really discovering Asia as the huge continent of the trade routes. And we discover that Persia, India, and China were in constant contact with each other, and eventually Southeast Asia and Japan developed beside them. When we discover those things, we can see patterns again, triads that are returning for power structures. And of course, what I want to say then are the trade religions as a good starting point to build from. And okay, let the Persians then try to build the Persian Tantra first, and then get inspiration to build what I think is a Western Tantra. Meanwhile, the Western Tantra, we have to develop quickly because we're doing drugs like mad at the moment. We're fucking anything that moves at the moment. We're dealing with mass hedonism and mass narcissism. We can't wait to develop a Western Tantra. We must develop one quickly. And this is what Layman Pascal picked up when I said it and said, sex, drugs, and psychoanalysis is my suggestion for the beginning of Western Tantra. And it has to be developed quickly. You know, you take guys on LSD that have troubled childhoods, and they say, if you give this to people, they blow their brains out. And you go, yeah, because people with troubled childhood do on one dose. And you say, that's why I don't want it in the public. I want it controlled, contained. inside of all
I
that
still
suits.
think psychoanalysis is very sutric.
No,
I don't think
not at all.
it
No,
gets
you're
there.
mixing it up
Tantra.
with psychotherapy. They're very, very, very different domains.
Even psychoanalysis.
Psychotherapy fixes and gets you back into your family life, gets you back to work. You just sure, it fixes you to be okay. That's what psychotherapy does. Psychoanalysis you can only do when you're first healthy and contained and controlled. You must be an adult to do it. And then you pursue the incessant pursuit of truth no matter what. Meaning psychoanalysis is a long chain of disappointments where you go, oh God, I wish I didn't know that. And then the analyst says, well, the genie's out of the bottle, so now to deal with it. And one thing at a time, you need to deal with things until there's nothing left and there's nothingness at the end of it. That is tantric. That is psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis is the Western Tantra. It starts with Freud, moves on to Lacan.
But it's still the talking business. It's not actually doing the ontological.
No. Psychoanalysis stopped being a talking business a long time ago. Our practice of psychoanalysis is incredibly embodied these days. There's no way you just sit and talk. We know the limits.
All right. Well, you can convince me about that.
One
of these days.
We're post Lacanian now, so we're way beyond that point. Absolutely.
I mean, even in itself, it's about finding the ways that the drives of the body are tangled up in speech.
Yeah.
So, from the beginning, it's looking at the body. I mean, some of Freud's early patients were people who were coming in with hysterical symptoms, like they couldn't move their arms, stuff like this, because of fucking traumas that they were going through. So this reading that psychoanalysis is all just about concepts and speech is, I think, totally wrong. And this is where, the presentation I gave last week when I was talking about thinking religion and then secular society dialectically and historically, if this is true, and I think it is true, we have to grapple with the fact that religion after psychoanalysis will not be the same as religion before psychoanalysis.
Exactly.
As religion after the Enlightenment, after the scientific revolution, after the discovery of anthropology, after the discovery of deep cultural and deep historical studies, is not the same thing. And this is where guys like Jordan Peterson, where the traditionalists get themselves all tangled up because they think they're going back to something, but they're already thinking it. And the very fact that Jordan Peterson can attempt to mix cognitive psychology with Christianity is proof that this isn't Christianity anymore. It's something beyond. It's something.
Peterson's megalomania started with his distrust of Lacan. And when he said Lacan was pretentious and a bullshitter, I knew he was out on them. He was done with me.
But you said post-Lacan.
Lacan was the greatest Western thinker of the 20th century. You cannot get beyond him. And Lacan takes you all the way to and completes the atheism and the nihilism inherent to Hegel and Nietzsche. He makes it personal. Now, if you want to personify Hegel's and Nietzsche's big breaks from the 19th century, go to Lacan. It's all yours. It's thrown at you. The only thing Lacan does not permit, and this is where Barth and Söderqvist add something, is that by not having instinct in the formula, by reintroducing instinct prior to drive and desire, by making instinct animalistic, that's what other flock animals do as well, by making drive mechanic, which is why Lacan was infinitely interested in it. Drive is fascinating like hell. That's drive in itself, pure drive. There's desire, which is drive added with language, which is deeply human. We're stuck in our symbolic worlds. We have imaginary and symbolic worlds, and we're stuck in those worlds. Right? And human beings are stuck in desire. Even to not want to have desire is a desire. Even to go and kill yourself, it's a desire. You cannot do anything as a human being without a desire. You have desires for everything. If only to go to sleep, it's a desire. The definition of desire is you cannot escape it. Meaning desire always postpones itself, moves its state to another object, moves on. But what was not in Lacan is Lacan is crazy wisdom, Western crazy wisdom in its purest form. Thomas Hammerich has nailed it. Lacan is the crazy wisdom teacher, must be read one. The crazy wisdom of Lacan is that he ends with nihilism and he says, I'm not going to go further than that. Not going to go beyond that point. But the problem then with Lacan is that you discovered is there's no theory on what a successful psychoanalysis can lead to. So psychoanalysis itself will become not only an impossibility, become a ridiculous activity, which Lacan has not subscribed to. So what's lacking in Lacan is to understand that there's a point called transcendence. We describe transcendence as its own drive.
Well, that is my point. I mean, the Tantra has to be about transcendence, right?
Yeah, exactly. Transcendence cannot be practiced in the Sutra realm. It cannot be practiced in public. It cannot be profane. It must be deeply private, sacred, only practiced behind the barred absolute, and its consequences must be contained. That's transcendence. Nothing else. And transcendence in Persian Tantra is the training to see not the overlap, but the meeting of the Haurva thought, which is your own subject's desire to live for as long as it can, knowing it must be exhausted at a certain point and want to die for having lived a full life. If you're lucky enough, you decide Haurva thought, which is to have lived a full life. You die happily. That's the goal of Zoroastrianism. You die with a smile on your face when you're 83, said, I did everything. There's only pain left. My friends are dying. I don't get the young any longer. I'm finished. I leave my space on this planet to a younger generation, and I'm happy with it. That is Haurva thought. That's why they don't bury the dead and moan them and things like that. They throw the corpses out into the desert and let the vultures eat them. Because if you lived a full life, you successfully lived it, Haurva thought, you learn the art of how to die. So when Western philosophers post-Lacan, like Simon Critch, are obsessed with the art of learning how to die. This is what Zoroastrians did for 3,700 years. The other aspect is Dhamiritat, what survives you. And you have to figure out during your analysis the right reasons for wanting something you've done to be around when you die. And you will discover it will not be ego-driven. When you're finished with the process of going towards Dhamiritat, you realize that if I happen to be lucky enough to do something that meant something to somebody, if I happen to be lucky enough to be part of something that other people can build from, if I happened to be lucky enough that I was loved as a child, so I could love my children in return, or if I was lucky enough to understand that the unlove I got from my parents, I could switch around and love my children the way I would have wanted to be loved and still love my children, which is negation of negation. If you learned to turn things around in your life because you were lucky enough to be smart enough to turn things around in such a way that actually you became a role model for your society, you make yourself available for the Dhamiritat. You never know once you're there because you're dead. But the Dhamiritat is the communities, the anjamans, possibility of using you as a forefather or a foremother. And then they celebrate your Polgasar every death day, every day you died for the next 70 years, called the Polgasar, which they do instead of having fucking funerals and burials. And the tradition here is that this is the Persian Tantra. The tradition is then because you're dead, you are located in a tantric realm that nobody else has access to. You're behind the barred absolute. And that barred absolute is called Shinavat. And the Shinavat in Persian philosophy is described as a bridge you crossed and you can never go back. And the only people who can cross the Shinavat bridge back and forth are, of course, Shamanoid people, Zautars, the original shamans, the Persian, shaman is a Mongolic word, and the Persian word for that is Zautar. The Zautars could go back and forth across the Shinavat bridge because they didn't belong in life and they didn't belong in death because they walked across and walked in and out of the territory. So they're described as the ones who cross the Shinavat and come back. They're Zautars, right? They're the shamans, but only them because they don't even belong to life. They don't even belong to our community, but we live here as living human beings. But we who live here, we want to go towards Sarvatat, and the community decides if we're worth being a Meditat afterwards. This is total submission and service to the community. Islam borrows this. Islam borrows this heavily from Zoroastrianism as Christianity borrowed from Judaism. Islam was just an attempt to quickly make Zoroastrianism a universal religion for all before it was mature enough to do it. Therefore, it created a dualist structure. So there's life after death, there's life before death, which is the replacement of the Sutra Tantra divide. If you take Sutra Tantra out of living people's lives, living lives they live, then you replace it with the idea that what we live here is nothing but the Sutra. Anything outside the Sutra is a sin, must be banned and destroyed, and anybody who practices a Tantra in here will be a scapegoat. That's the Christian and Islamic nightmare. Therefore, they place everything that you were supposed to do before you died, you wanted to do before you died, but couldn't do, you place that in the heaven afterwards, which Christianity and Islam do. And this is their problem. But there's nothing wrong with Islam's idea that submission is fundamental to being human and being part of the community. You must submit yourself to the matriarch in the community. Otherwise, you become a fucking boring, lousy narcissist and you become your own hell.
No, I agree with that. Submission is underrated as a
absolute key
as a concept.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've done an hour here. Do you want to go to Q&A, guys?
I'd love to go to Q&A. How about Owen?
Yeah.
Thanks for the lecture yesterday. By the way, you guys, if you got into what we talked about tonight, you watched Owen's lecture from last week. They're really connected. So here we go.
So
Okay.
Q&As. Does anyone have anything on the tip of their tongue that they just want to come out with? Usually we'd say write it in the chat, but has anyone got anything?
Yes.
Great. Mr. Freud.
Thank you. So, Alexander, do you have any advice on how to properly conduct an exodus in, our information age?
Okay. My advice is just to do paradigmatics, which is what we try to do. We basically say you're in the priesthood position. You're an ironic nihilist here. But you want what's good for people and for yourself as well in your sutric life. What you do then is that you study how the previous paradigm developed and why it developed the way it did. The key here is Marshall McLuhan. If anybody deserves to be called the American or Canadian equivalent of Lacan in the 20th century philosophy, it's Marshall McLuhan. He's absolute key because he did the opposite of Lacan. If Lacan studied the soul in detail and understood how it works and the mechanisms of the soul, then Lacan studied the mechanism of the world that surrounds human beings. And here's the trick. Why did the printing press do what it did? And why did the printing press in hindsight turn out to be such a winning formula? And why did the people who took the printing press seriously and spread Bildung, as Lene Rachel Anderson and Sackstein called it, spread Bildung or education widely to people? So they taught people how to read, write, and count, and therefore made them much smarter than they were in the past because they now had access to technologies that made them smarter than they were in the past. They could learn a lot more than they knew in the past. So how did that work? Now, what lessons can be learned from that? How can you study, for example, Paris 1789 as the explosion of the previous paradigm shift? What does it mean to be a woke person? Well, you end up in Versailles, powdering your nose, being offended by nasty words, and you're a loser. You rather want to end up in the streets of Paris, being online all the time, being digitally savvy, and then create the new world there and go with Owen Coxer, for example, and create fantastic new art forms that suit the digital world and the digital age. So I think we stand a good chance of surviving. We have a few bombs to get rid of. Climate's not going to kill us. It's just got to make us move a bit more, which I think is good for us. Digital nomadism is here to stay. I'd say that if you learn how the previous paradigms work, preferably both the previous paradigms, study the feudalist age that Putin loves, and the Islamists love. The fucking losers today are the fundamentalists that want to bring us back two paradigms ago, which is terrible paradigmatics, including Jordan Peterson. But the people who do want to take us into the future and create that exodus should really try to find out how digital will really work. Guys like Daniel Schmachtenberg and Tristan Harris and me have given this a lot of thought. Like, what would really happen when digital hits us? There are crazy wisdom teachers like Mark Stallman, who's a genius at this, a McLuhanite from Canada. He's fiendishly hard to work with and deal with. He's a fucking crazy wisdom teacher. But when he gets it, he's fucking brilliant because he sees through all the bullshit and gets what digital is really going to do. When it's to say that digital will from now on remember absolutely everything, and it will be like a heavy wall that rolls over all humanity with its new pursuit of truth, which it will find. That's Mark Stallman's idea from the 1990s. Brilliant way of describing digital. So once you've understood how digital will function, then you have to ask yourself the honest question, am I one of the winners or not? Do I have the talents required? Or is my talent only to get it? And then maybe inspire others who have the talents to become winners of the digital age. Then you find those winners. That's when you walk around in Egypt and ask people, okay, I'm a slave in this society. I'm being spit at. I'm being mistreated. But I'm a fucking winner because I get the new age. I get digital. And I'm digital personified. So I want to leave and go somewhere else and establish that. And then you go somewhere else and establish that. So you're a crypto enthusiast. You go to Paraguay and Panama. They're probably going to win. You go somewhere else and establish new ideas, try them out, and then you become a winner. And that's how you conduct the exodus. You leave an old age and walk into a new age by getting the new age, understanding it. In the case of the Hebrews in Egypt, it was clearly that they understood monotheism. Monotheism had failed in Egypt. They become the monotheistic cult in Egypt. They knew they were just early with monotheism, but monotheism would win. They went to Canaan, established the Hebrew language, connected with the Phoenicians, and they won.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. That really resonates with me.
Good.
Great. I realized that actually Rickard had put a question in the chat before we went to Q&A. Rickard, do you want to tell your question?
Sure. So I was thinking about the Bard Absolute, and how one can create that when psychedelics are so freely available nowadays with the dark web, for instance. It's not that the shaman can keep this for himself any longer.
Absolutely correct, and that's problematic. Thankfully, the vast majority of the time, kids take psychedelics, they get a psychedelic experience, and it means not that much to them. So it gets vulnerable when you go up to the higher doses and you want to explore something different. And that's problematic. So the barred absolute is the opposite of the barred subject in Lacan. There's no barred object. There's a barred subject. We are chasing objects all the time, and we have the object. We were sucking our mother's tit, right? And we do fuck vaginas and suck dick. So we do have the objects. We don't have that kind of accessibility to our own subjectivity. You are your own blind spot. You cannot see into yourself. And the way you see into yourself, you can only go towards a certain void, but because this void is operating, it's oscillating, it still works. So no matter how much you theoretically study your barred subject or study the idea of subjectivity, for example, in Lacan, or in Hegel for that matter, you end up with just this negation within an oscillation. There's nothing else there. So if the subject is barred, then the question is, what else is barred to you? Oops, the future is barred to you and the secret is barred to you. The secret is that which you cannot have access to because you're not ready for it, and the future is barred to you because you're not part of it and you will die before it happens. So the way I describe the barred absolute is that in process and event, I explored it with Jan Söderqvist, that the three dreams we have, and to not go nihilistic, there has to be the third dream, which is going to be very important. The first dream is that the agricultural revolution eventually tames and domesticates the entire planet, and we have a garden of God. And we have to because of climate change. We have to turn our planet into a garden. The second revolution is the city of God, that all the people of the world finally communicate with one another, and we have to create some kind of permanent peace with each other, and with the help of technology, that's possible. If that's possible, then that's a dream called the city of God, meaning the entire planet has also become a city that works. The third dream, though, because these two dreams have endpoints, and that means you're not going to go towards an endpoint if the endpoint is the end of the game. You can go to the promised land and build a temple in a holy place, and the temple becomes the axis mundi, the center of the planet. But it's not until God moves into the temple that the temple means anything to you. And so far, you never found a God who moved into a temple, so that's just not happening. This is why the third category in Bartasodic is called the Tower of God. And you essentially walk up to a tower. It's phallic because it represents the future. You go up to a tower, and there's a door on the Tower of God. And the door sign says, you cannot get inside here, but your children may. Please note how this is exactly what Harvatat is. You come all the way up to the Tower of God, you're not getting inside, and then you die. But because your efforts and the continuous efforts, while you're confronted with the Tower of God, can establish in the world your Harvatat, which means you die in front of the Tower of God, can be an Ameritat for children, and they might be able to go into the Tower of God and then find out the next thing. But there's always an end point that you cannot go behind, because otherwise we go utopian. The protopian worldview ends with an end point for you that you cannot go behind. This is why the Hebrews crossed the desert for 40 years, so that everybody who was born in Egypt would die before they would go into the promised land. It's in the rewriting in the Torah, greatly inspired by Zoroastrianism. The second telling of the Exodus is a telling of that everybody has to die and commit the Harvatat, which we left Egypt for the sake of our children, so that our children can walk into the promised land and establish the kingdom of God. This is the Barred Absolute's most fundamental sense between generations. You live now and you will die. And after you're dead, history will move on without you. And that history you have no access to, no control over. You can only affect that history while you're still alive. Once you're dead, you can't do anything about it. This is why being alive here and being truth as an act in the world is absolutely central to your self-identity. But there's nothing beyond it. Not for you, but for the sociology, for the tribe. Absolutely. Does that make sense? So when you see that barred absolute, you can then see that the resources around you have similar qualities, in the sense that taking a drug is a bit like leaving this place and going somewhere else. Shamanoid, right? Is that a place you're prepared to go to? Are you the right person to visit it? If you're not, don't take the drug. Unless you are the right person to go there, that trip should be made specifically for the interest of the tribe, because you're going to go there to learn something, experience something, which then could make you a warmer, more generous person to give things to other people, and possibly take them there for healing purposes or whatever. It has meaning to you, then you must go there. That's why it's a tantric practice. And that's why in tantric practice is always an intention. Why now? Why you? Why with this other person? Why should you go there? Is this the right thing to do? And you can cancel the whole ceremony until the very last second if the intention gets you there. But if you at the end of the intention says, yep, this is the right time, this is the right place, I am the right person, this is the best friend I should have, we'll do it together, off we go. And then you do the ceremony. And after the ceremony, you integrate the experience. And in the integration, it's a parallax. The integration is you have the intention that kept you grounded during the ceremony. If you fly really high, you have to remember what you promised your friend during the intention. That keeps you on the ground. Otherwise, you fly off and you go mad. And so you stay with that realm, and then you go into the integration. Integration is that, but something happened you never expected. Exactly. So something came from the future, which is the will to transcendence, which is what you did not expect from the trip. And something was exactly what expected from the trip, which is the intention you stay with. The integration of the will to transcendence and the will to intelligence, what you expected and what surprised you, the integration of those two things then becomes the experience itself. That is the integrated whole when you're truly tantric. And then you can consider in the future if you're going to go through something like that again, you're going to advise other people to do it, you're going to guide them into that experience, because that experience fundamentally is usually the experience of either the infinite trauma or the infinite now, or the great trauma, the infinite now. The great trauma is the ultimate horror. You either do psychedelics to experience ultimate horror. Why? Because you're going to treat people and meet people in your life who live in absolute horror. You're not ashamed unless you've done that. The infinite now is absolute bliss and ecstasy. Absolute bliss. It's opium in your mother's womb, without a care in the world, with your best friend and your Pollux and Castor. Absolute bliss. You learn from the absolute bliss that if you would stay there, it would be horrible. But it's fantastic because it's temporary. That's the beauty of it. Once you learn that, you learn how to come down because you got to get out of it. That's how you learn to deal with trauma. Traumatology is the exact replica of evatology, only the other way around. Once you're down in the absolute lowest, worst horror of trauma, you have to learn how to get out of it and climb your way up. And you'd be surprised how many kick seekers there are who want to stay in the bliss, and they should never have been there in the first place. They were never ready for the tantric. And you'd be surprised how many people who love their trauma so fucking much, they return to it constantly and throw it at everybody around them and pull everybody down into their trauma because they want everybody to be there with them because they love the trauma too much. This is where psychoanalysis works. Psychoanalysis works with exposing that you're just a little bigot sitting in the greatest trauma ever, you want to stay there. Or you're just the biggest kick seeker ever. You just want to be in constant bliss all the time. You can't live in a regular life. You can't even go up on a Monday morning, take a cup of coffee, and go to work. You're totally dysfunctional. And exposing this dysfunctionality is the job of anthropology, to take people down from bliss. And the job of traumatology is take people up from the traumas. Hope that makes sense, but that's tantric work in essence.
Great stuff. Mr. Yuri.
All right. So how do you see the relationship between religion and state? Because you mentioned that like logos and pathos lead a tribe or an organization. And so like in the US Constitution, both the logos and pathos are at the head of the state. But then you mentioned like in the Jewish, the culture, the religion is connected to the state. So how do you see a religion? Is just the priest the head of the religion, or is religion also led by a chief? I don't see how.
It's a definition. So this is the first sentence in the Synthesis book. Everything is religion. If it pretends not to be religion, it's bad religion. The state is religion. The military is religion. Everything is religion. It's either good or bad religion, meaning it's constructive or destructive religion. If it's not aware of being religion, then it's dangerous. The problem in political ideology after Enlightenment was the political ideologies were religious. Communism is religion. Liberalism is religion. Capitalism is religion. Conservatism is religion. The different religions, we should compare different religions. Within religion, we make the difference between the chief and the priest, where the chief symbolizes the strongest physical power, and the priest symbolizes the strongest mental power. And that's why the monks go with the priest and the soldiers go with the chief. And that's how masculinity is divided. And this is the beauty of masculinity, to learn how to respect and love the others who are not like you. The priest loves the chief loves the priest, monks love soldiers, soldiers love monks. Monks have stern minds, soldiers have strong bodies. Okay, they're embodied, all of them, if it's a good religion. That's what religion is. And that's why the division between capitalism and nationalism is not as good as it should be, because capitalism and nationalism religions go to the second axis. Nationalism and capitalism are essentially the difference between hunter and warrior. The Chinese do the same thing. The Chinese have developed religions called Confucianism and Taoism that actually are so rather on that plane rather than they are on the plane of the priest and chief. They can be discussed. Chinese philosophers probably might want to disagree on that one, but Taoism and Confucianism developed in parallel in a similar way that capitalism and nationalism did in the West. In the West, clearly, capitalism is on the side of the hunter. Nationalism is on the side of the warrior. And please note, in our age, when masculinity is hated, and classical feminism, which is beautiful, has been destroyed and turned into a paradigm itself called radical feminism, which is basically organized man-hate, pacifism and vegetarianism come along. And always in history, when pacifism and vegetarianism become popular new ideas, they were never new. They were always the hatred of the hunter and the warrior. Pacifism is directed against the warrior. Pacifism, meaning it's anti-nationalism, meaning it's anarchic dreams that national borders can disappear. Anybody can move anywhere they like. Now, you know, I hate heart and negri with a vengeance. I hate anarchism. Completely despicable. It's a childish little pillar saying dream. If you just open up the borders, everything will automatically organize the peaceful way. No, it will not. It will lead to ultimate bloodshed. I think Thomas Summerett agrees with me here. The way to open up for paganism completely is anarchism. Anarchy is hell. We don't want anarchy. And anarchy is precisely what you go for, where you say, well, if only the soldiers disappeared and John Lennon was right, and there was no longer any nations, but we lived in a borderless world where anybody could go anywhere they liked, and everybody would just automatically, peacefully share everything they had. No, they will not. The Augusts will still hate the guys who are beautiful. The Augusts will still hate the beautiful guys for getting fucked more. Girard is absolutely right. And I share with Girard is an adamant hatred towards anarchism, and especially guys like Hart and Negri and whatever was left of the left after in the 1980s when they dropped Marx. Marx would have hated it too. Hart and Negri's Empire is one of the most disgusting books ever written. It's on the par with Mao's Little Red Book, the Quran, and Mein Kampf. It's a despicable and shit book by two idiots, right? I'm not impressed. This is the problem. And vegetarianism, watch out when it gets popular, because vegetarianism is the attack on the hunter, because the hunter who hunts and comes home proud to the tribe and throws up the animals full of B12 vitamins and minerals. And the girls have been out picking berries to supplement the steak, which is the most nutritious meal a human being can have. This is the meal we have in the tribe before we fuck each other late at night. And if the hunter isn't allowed to come home and impress and show his abundance, he gets fucked up. He can't fuck women. And this is why businessmen have to come home with a deal. Businessmen are today's hunters. Engineers are today's warriors. But the problem with capitalism and nationalism, why are they not all the way religious, is that their religions on the par with the hunter and the warrior. We need religion all the way up to the level of the priest and chief. And that's the sort of Western religion I want to create. Hope it makes sense. You guys get me going. I'm in the middle of the book, as you know here. Yeah.
Mr. Ago.
Am I allowed?
Oh,
Maybe he wants a follow-up.
yeah, go on.
Am I allowed to ask another question?
If you've got another question, it's please get in the queue. There's probably not time because there's a few.
Sure.
So Ago.
Thank you. So let's see if I remember the question. Yes, it was, and now this new network paradigm, what kind of family structures will be either needed or cultivated or enabled?
Oh, the structures are there already because technology has supplied them already. So what happens is that if you become a local leader of a certain community or a certain interest, we call them subcultures today. All the subcultures that work online are basically mimicking the old socio-original tribe. So if you become a tribal leader today, you become a leader of a community. People look up to you. You're the initiator. You're the moderator. You keep it all together. You might be somebody they look up to because you're older. You have a wisdom to transfer to others. Other people are younger than you, have energy. You love them because of their energy. You have the sort of generational things going on. If you've got a successful community in general, people will get in touch with you because they will discover in their data feeds that you're a successful leader. Then the leaders have a network with each other. That network is a higher network in the hierarchy, right? You automatically have a higher network in the hierarchy. The leaders of those leadership networks will then instantly get in touch with each other. And they will then create a new network on top of the previous network, and that will become the next network. This automatically happens. So as the internet develops, we spend more time online, become more sophisticated, we have more data feeds. These data feeds are more widely available. Algorithms become more free and open and no longer manipulated or corrupted, but rather are free and open so they reflect you and your desires. Then suddenly you see the pattern very clearly. Of course, this also happened in the previous world. You look at the World Economic Forum, it's a network event for politicians and industrial leaders, but it's a network event for the old paradigm. So it's really the Versailles today. So we have the Versailles of the old paradigm, which is the World Economic Forum and the United Nations and things like that, big corporate events, whatever. But we will certainly get similar patterns for digital. And it's the big tech bros right now because only the first of the three autocracies has been developed. But as soon as we have sensocracies to beat the shit out of politics, as soon as we have satellites absolutely everywhere, and we have control of data feeds of what human beings are doing everywhere, we will have police states. And these police states will then start networking with each other and create the new sensocratic networks. And eventually, hopefully, we have creators like Owen, for example, who invent whole new forms for art, and they will be the protopians, and they're also the technological innovators. Eventually, you will have all three in the talkers develop, because this is just a repetition of the symbolic, the imaginary, and the real. And the real always comes first. The real always comes first. Today, it's data. In the previous paradigm, it was money. Before that, it was monotheism and centralization in settlement. So land ownership, essentially. So whatever is real first comes first and irritates the old paradigm intensely. And the old paradigm tries to overcome the real, which comes from the future, by killing it. And when it can't kill it, it tries to control it and contain it. And then it moralizes against it. That's why everything digital now is now bad, moralized against, although it's incredibly powerful in taking over the world. Because the old structures want to kill it. So for example, the algorithms right now are manipulated by politics. They're corrupted by money. They're conformed by academia and mass media. Politics is dying. Money is dying. Academia is dying. And of course, a lot of food women are moving into those realms because the men have left, because they're all going digital, as men usually do. They're off the hooks first. They go to promised land before women do. The women will come along, but eventually, because they want to fuck the men. But eventually, that's the pattern you're seeing at the moment. The three autocracies have not developed yet. This is going to take quite a while yet. It's going to be very violent when they do, probably bloody as well, and very, very messy, because the old paradigm is not going to go down lightly. But I would say politics and money and academia, get out of those three realms if you can, or play with them ironically. Ted Last and I have conversations about this, whether you should have an academic career next to a very fresh digital career as well. You are allowed to go into academia, into politics. You are allowed to play around with the money, but you must understand these are dying paradigms that will be replaced by a much more powerful paradigm, which is based on digital alone and on data feeds.
So we're coming up to an hour and a half almost. I'm wondering if we should have one more question and then close out and then move on into our Wonder Room. What do you think, Owen?
Yeah, I actually wanted to say, I think Egel's question was specifically about family structures rather than the social structure. So Alexander, have you got any thoughts on family?
This is the great thing with human beings. Anything that's biologically pre-programmed in us you can work with. Say I work with a guy who never had a dad. If I work with him psychoanalytically speaking, I go to his body, directly onto the body, say your body's a memory. Your dick will tell you what a man wants. Your chest will tell you what a man wants. Your hormones will tell you what a man wants. You can use your own body as a storage of biology. The great thing about biology is also memory. So family works. The problems with the nuclear family are, of course, because a Prussian bureaucrat fooled us into believing we should all be nuclear family people in the 1815s. People are mistaken in America, thought we were ever meant to be nuclear families. I always remind people, no, I never found Adam and Eve anywhere in New Guinea or in the Brazilian jungle. Adam and Eve is a made-up thing. No, Adam and Eve are principles. Adam and Eve are not people, okay? So nuclear family has to be gotten rid of. We just had a discussion on the IDW today when Linda Rachel Anderson pointed out that daycare centers actually work. And the daycare centers mean that women want to have more children. And France and Sweden are pioneers of the creche and the doggies. Beautiful ideas. Why? Because they're tribal. Anything you work with, when things get insecure, you're in the middle of a paradigm shift, hell breaks loose. I'll tell you what, family works. Family reforms. I'm working with a big project in Stockholm with tons of burners involved. We called the Chosen Family, and it's beautiful. It's men and women who try to explore new ways of living with each other without an incest taboo, by the way. So explore to live with each other. And Owen, you and Raven are hopefully going to come to Stockholm to get engaged in this and see what we're doing here in Scandinavia. But why are we doing it in Scandinavia? Because we are the first culture where the nuclear family totally failed. We moved from 2 to 3 to 4 divorces in a lifetime until finally people realized nuclear family was over, because family is way bigger than nuclear family. Family works, clan works, tribe works, which is also when you're confronted with other cultures and their clan cultures. Deal with that. Clan is great because then at least you get somebody to talk to. Go and see the oldest woman in the clan is my tip, and you probably can deal with them and trade with them and do things with them. But I love family, clan, and tribe. The problem is beyond tribe, because we never were beyond tribe until very recently. Larger structures like nation and empire are fiendishly difficult to deal with. And the corporations go beyond tribe size. They need guys like me to work with because they need to work with the corporate leadership. Otherwise, they will lose it all. That's the problem with humanity. It's a question of scale. And at certain scales, we work wonderfully and beautifully, but at certain larger scales, we lose it completely. And that's what we need to watch out.